Hey y'all, today I wanted to talk about forgotten, dropped, and all-out abandoned video game franchises. Basically, games that haven't gotten sequels, remakes, or any sort of side games for many, many years. While doing some research for this video, I was surprised to find just how many IPs have been dropped, many of which I had forgotten myself. In fact, I could, and should, probably make a further video of 10 more dropped franchises. Still, I wanted to focus on 10 that in one way or another meant a lot to me. Games that I enjoyed when I was younger, and have lamented that there haven't been other entries in many years. Note that these aren't in any particular order, they're just a collection of franchises I've had a personal connection to. So sit back and we'll explore some nostalgia. Here are the 10 dropped game franchises I wish would make a comeback. So first up, I wanted to talk about Parasite Eve. The series follows FBI agent Aya Bree as she gets caught up in a case that turns into complete Cronenbergian body horror. The first game was initially Square's response to Resident Evil, and uses fixed cameras, tank controls, and similar jump scare techniques as Capcom's flagship franchise. Where it differs, however, is with the RPG elements used. In other words, you got your Final Fantasy and my Resident Evil. On paper, it seems like it shouldn't work, but it really does, and somehow succeeds at delivering a genuinely chilling story, while also having a gameplay loop that keeps the player invested. The second game has a Los Angeles setting, where it was New York in the first. It is much more action-heavy than its predecessor, but it still has some excellent and scary creature designs, and uses the high-end cutscenes Square was known for. Yes, these look tame now, but Square was the studio delivering some of the best cutscenes in the business at the time. The last game we got in the franchise, The Third Birthday, was in 2010, and was only loosely based on the events of the first two games, and sadly it's not as good as them either. I think there's a lot of room for another game in this franchise. Aya Bree is a solid character, and with the recent successes of the Resident Evil and Final Fantasy remakes, I think a new game using a modern engine could be awesome. At any rate, I think we need more sci-fi/horror RPGs out there. And while we're on the subject of horror, can we please have some more Eternal Darkness? While one game may not be considered a franchise, I would love to see another game in the universe of Eternal Darkness. It's one of the most unique horror games of its era, and arguably one of the most unique ever made. The story was relatively simple, but I'm always a fan of Lovecraftian old gods horror in my games. In my opinion, very few horror games before or since have so effectively captured the feeling of helplessness and a descent into insanity. Fourth wall breaking, which did things like making the player think their save file had been deleted, to making it look like one's TV itself was glitching out, was some of the best game immersion this side of Hideo Kojima. I love it when games subvert and play with expectations, and I'd love to see another game in the Eternal Darkness universe. And what's that? Even more survival horror? I had to put Dino Crisis on this list because it's one of the franchises I've loved since release. Directed by Capcom legend Shinji Mikami, the first game mixes the premise of the first Resident Evil game, sending in operatives to a remote location to investigate a problem, and Jurassic Park, said remote location being an island with dinosaurs. In the Dino Crisis universe, dinosaurs are brought to the present time with time travel technology, and the intention is warfare rather than theme park construction.
What exactly happened to Gale? You said that he was attacked by a dinosaur?
Yeah, I couldn't believe it.
I love dinosaurs and survival horror, and Dino Crisis always felt like a match made in heaven for me. Much like Resident Evil 2 and Parasite Eve 2, Dino Crisis 2 leaned much more heavily into a pure action experience, but the strength of the protagonist and the frenetic experience still absolutely make it worth playing today. Sadly, Dino Crisis 3, released on the original Xbox, pretty much completely lost the magic of the first two games, and barely even feels like it's in the same universe. I know I, along with many fans, wait with bated breath for the announcement of anything Dino Crisis related during game showcases, much as we wait for Sony to announce any PC port of Bloodborne. Like I mentioned with Parasite Eve, the time is now for a new game in the series, with the success of the most recent Resident Evil remakes and games. Next, for a bit of a genre segue, I present Ecco the Dolphin, a series that ended up inadvertently scaring many a kid, me included, back when it came out. What? Ecco the Dolphin, a horror game? Yes, I do believe it counts, and even in a two-dimensional 16-bit form, it introduced me to the concept of thalassophobia and being a nigh helpless character surviving in an increasingly harsh ocean. Later in the game, it turns into a straight-on eldritch abomination story, with a face-off of a dolphin against an alien queen in space. Yes, this game was trippy as hell. The sequel improved on the gameplay elements in my opinion, balancing the game a little better and softening up some of the more infuriating things. The last game we got in the franchise was Ecco Defender of the Future on the Dreamcast, with a later PS2 port, which was a pretty decent game in its own right, featuring some excellent sea creature animation, for the time anyway, and solid ocean environment design. A sequel featuring the titular dolphin will be awesome. Maybe in the meantime we can look at Subnautica as sort of a spiritual successor. Hey, it's got the Deepwater scares down at least, right? Jumping out of the ocean, another excellent franchise with 16-bit origins is Gunstar Heroes. Originally released as a Genesis exclusive in 1993, Gunstar Heroes remains one of my favorite games of all time. Developer Treasure was a powerhouse of a studio throughout the 90s, and cranked out a series of beloved platformers and run-and-gun games, many on the Genesis in particular. I love the game because it's short and concise without a lot of extra fluff. You can finish it in under 2 hours, but the ability to customize your weapons by collecting power-ups, and also the ability to choose what path you want to take from the start, make it super replayable. The last game in the franchise was released in 2005 as Gunstar Superheroes, and it's a great game in its own right, but poor sales seem to unfortunately put the nail in the coffin for the Gunstars. There might be too much of a gap between releases for a proper sequel or remake, but if we did get another game in the Gunstar franchise, I'd definitely get it day one. And next we have the Tenchu series. The Tenchu games emphasize stealth gameplay above all else, which was a bit of an anomaly, especially at the time of its release. While the earlier games suffer from some of that jank that we've come to love from when companies were still figuring out how to translate gameplay to a 3D space, I think they are still playable in their own right. Apparently From Software owns the current rights to the series, and tell me that Sekiro doesn't share at least some similarities, i.e. grappling to rooftops, stealth kills, and the feudal Japanese setting. Tenchu had some really cool and unique concepts, and have in one way or another found their way into more recent games, especially the idea of having multiple ways to complete each mission. The PS2 also had a decent run of Tenchu games, arguably peaking with Tenchu Wrath of Heaven. I'd absolutely love to see another game in the Tenchu universe. Leaping into another feudal Japanese setting, we have Onimusha. Did I mention I like survival horror? Originally developed for the PS1, but ultimately released on PS2, Onimusha took events and figures from real Japanese history and injected them with supernatural elements, which made for a pretty unique experience. It's once again a series that has heavy Resident Evil elements, from the tank controls to fixed camera angles to the general atmosphere of horror, but the setting, weapons, and mechanics allowed it to stand out. Samanosuke uses a katana as his main weapon, and obtains a vessel that allows him to collect the souls of enemies he's defeated, which is more than a little similar to Devil May Cry, a Capcom franchise which has actually had more recent games. The last proper release was 2006 Dawn of Dreams, which, as is tradition, was a much more action-oriented game than the previous ones, and uses a more Devil May Cry style of hack-and-slash action. Either way, I love the setting and atmosphere of the Onimusha games, and I'd love another mainline release, or even a remake of the first game. Next, for a much brighter, more cartoony series, we have Mega Man Legends. I've been a Mega Man fan in general pretty much since I started gaming, and the Legends games are no exception. Legends saw Mega Man take a full foray into 3D, and exchanged the 2D run-and-gun elements of the mainline series for an open-world, RPG elements, and a third-person shooter point of view. The facial expressions and anime style were a fun standout in the era, and was a nice complement to the Mega Man aesthetic as a whole. Like with Parasite Eve, Mega Man Legends takes two seemingly incompatible genres and makes them work pretty effectively. We've seen 3 games in the series total, with the Misadventures of Tron being a prequel to the main events. Mega Man Legends 3 was announced back in 2010, but was ultimately cancelled. Come on, Capcom. Now, let's shred on over to the SSX snowboarding series. Released under the EA Sports Big label, which was reserved for more casual, arcade-style sports games, SSX was almost certainly ushered in by the success of the Tony Hawk Pro Skater games, a series which actually did have a recent remake. My favorite is SSX Tricky, seen in these clips, and I really enjoy the fast-paced, risk-reward gameplay that is easy to pick up but harder to master. The last game we got was a reboot of sorts with 2012's SSX, which was reviewed favorably, but maybe lost some of the silly, arcadey appeal of the older games. I've never been a big sports guy by any stretch, but I'd love if EA brought back SSX, and also the arcade-style sports games like NBA and NFL Street that were a super fun way to kill an afternoon. And last, but certainly not least, we have Power Stone. I realize that Capcom keeps coming up on this list, but it just happens that they're responsible for so many games that I've loved throughout the years, and as such, for so many franchises that have been all but abandoned. Power Stone is Capcom firing on all fighting game cylinders, and as an arcade experience, it still has one of the most unique premises: the ability to run around a 3D arena and grab objects from the environment to use as weapons. Also, gathering Power Stones to change into a super-powered version of your character is a cool twist on super meters. We've only gotten 2 games on Dreamcast and a remake of those games on the PSP, so I would absolutely love a new entry in this series. To conclude, I found that there are many franchises in need of some TLC, whether it be in the form of reboots, remakes, or sequels. There are many, many more titles that I was reminded of even while making this video, and I'm almost certain I'll be making more of these to cover all of the beloved franchises of the past that have been glossed over. Let me know if some of my choices resonated with you in the comments, and also if you have some titles you might want me to cover in later videos. Thanks again for watching. I appreciate any and all support. As before, I'm on Patreon at patreon.com/theinfernalrealm, where I post video updates, and I stream on Twitch as an Infernal One. Thanks again for all the support, and I'll see you again soon.